Hey everybody, Quantum here, and what I would like to do is create a couple of videos outlining the decks that you can likely see coming up in the metagame now that we are around 24 hours removed from the announcement of HIRAM and Photosphere's ban. There are a lot of people testing right now, and I'm seeing everything from Emerald Amethyst, Amber Steel, Ruby Amethyst, Blurple and Amethyst Sapphire, and Amethyst Steel, popping up in the metagame. But in this particular video, before we get to these other decks, I do want to cover what I think a Ruby Sapphire and a Sapphire Steel items-based list might look like. I don't think it's a secret that if you're going to play Ruby Sapphire moving forward, the best iteration you can likely play are the shark-oriented lists that focus around McDuck Manor and things like Pirate's Life and the actions that you can play there. But if you did want to play items, a list might need to adapt to include Chichas, which is another form of a draw engine, significantly weaker than HIRAM, right? Because it's much more vulnerable. Being a 2/1 body, it instantly gets outed by all of the steel songs. It's still brawlable. It can be targeted down with ice blocks and or sapphire coils for fodder against small Sisu to eat. It still gets hit by big Sisu. But can it survive long enough as a draw engine to actually generate you advantage? That's all you really need. And so a list that I put together here, which I have not tested in the field yet. I've only played Emerald Amethyst so far, and I've done decently well post HIRAM ban with that deck. But this is an interesting list, something that I experimented with even before the HIRAM ban, obviously with HIRAM in this list. But utilizing Ramp with the Kita and the Queen for Item Scry could be a useful package because you have two cards that need to exert to proc abilities, both very powerful abilities, and so you can synergize a list around them that focuses on readying up those characters to protect them or proc their abilities for a second time within the same turn. So playing something like LeFou, Gold Coin, and or even Rhea could be options for you to get two items into play out of nowhere off the Queen, get double ink ramp off of the Kita. Now, this list doesn't play Tipo or Sail, and the other list that I tested last format did play those, and it did fairly well. I do think the Sail and the Tipo are pretty integral parts in order to get some certain combo lines off, like getting the Kita down on 3, and then getting the double or triple ramp off Kita by turn 4, when she can actually start proccing her ability, is pretty good. But because you have a 3-drop that you may want to utilize in the Queen, this is an option that doesn't synergize too well with the Tipo and Sail. So even if you're just playing out regularly, your goal is that, yes, I'm going to play slow in the beginning, but I'm going to aim to get my item packages online because people probably won't be on as much item hate. So your items, once they're established, will likely be pretty safe for the most part. And then you can aim to close out the game from there with the items in rotation to really deal with your opponent's board. You still do everything that Ruby Sapphire wants to do in terms of its removal with the small Sisu, big Sisu, and brawls. No Be Prepareds, no songs in general, so you're pretty safe from the Ursula Deceiver, which is going to be coming up in the meta, in my opinion, quite heavily. Only 15 on Inkables, so still fairly accessible, and the fact that you play Fishbone is helpful as well. 2 Great Stone Dragons. Again, if Cusco's or Hideaways are still around in the meta, your Great Stone Dragon is pretty important as basically a free inking engine to proc the Sapphire Coral every turn. I've talked about this in previous videos, I think in either the last meta report or the one before it, where I said, everybody's basically on Stone Dragon because they realize once they get towards the end game, they don't have as many cards in hand to proc Sapphire Coil as much as they would like, and the Stone Dragon is a free proc of the Sapphire Coil. This is made even more apparent now that you don't have access to HIRAM, even less card draw. But you can see here, like the Chicha engine, while it is weaker because it's more susceptible with only 1 willpower, it gets outed by a lot of the steel songs quite instantly, or other things that ping for 1 damage, fire the cannons, etc. Even though, fire the cannons is 2 damage. But you don't need this thing to be online for all that long. As long as it's online for like a draw 1, draw 2, it's at least fulfilling its purpose. It does have support, which can come up, right? Giving an extra 2 strength to something so you can run over a pesky location or big body is quite relevant. And while this deck may not look like it can survive an early game, especially if we move into an aggro-oriented meta, you do still have the Bell. And with 23 items, of which all of the 1-drop items proc on their own, except for the unconventional tool, you do need to proc the banish off of another card, in which case the Bell comes in here. You can opt to play this or not, but getting this banished and then being able to play any of these items for 1 is really, really good, or playing the Sapphire Coil for free, right? At one point, you expect to see Bell. Of course, you hope to see your 3-drop items off of the Queen when you scry 4 for that item, and getting these in rotations for free or for 1 is very good. But getting the Bell down on turn 1, if you know you're against an aggro deck, can do a lot to slow the opponent down. Once you're able to get the Fishbone Quill in rotation, right, you can start dropping your Mauis and then eventually ramp up to your big Sisu. The one thing I will say about this Kita that's really nice is the inking ability from this, especially if you can ready it up and proc its ability more than once in a single turn, is that it doesn't take ink away from your hand like Fishbone Quill does or like Tipo does. It's taking it from the top of your deck. So this card will allow you to scry the top of your deck for 2, put one of those cards into the inkwell, put the other on top of your deck so that you know what you're going to be drawing. You can get rid of, like a dead draw, especially if you can proc this twice. You can look at the top 3 basically, put 2 of them into your inkwell. You've ramped, you've set up your draw for the next turn or draw for this turn if you, let's say, have Chicha, because Chicha, for example, if you ink for turn and then you ink off of the Kita, you will be able to draw off the Chicha, which is really nice energy there, right? So this lines up well. Again, the Tipo and the Sail, being able to play the Kita on turn 3 is very nice, but we've opted to forego that because we're dropping the Queen on 3. We're not necessarily looking to skip the turn 3 as much as we were before. As you can see, a lot of 3 drops, only 1 4-drop now, right? No Grammatala, obviously no HIRAM, no Rhea in this build, right? Where we were experimenting with Rhea in the previous build. That was when we had a lot of 4 drops, right? We had Rheas, Kitas, HIRAMs. Now we're switching over to the Queen. So this is an interesting list to test. Again, I haven't tested this list out myself directly in competitive matches. I've really only played Emerald Amethyst so far, and that's been doing decently well. But that is a list to consider if you were aiming to play Ruby Sapphire. A very big item package, so the odds are that you are going to consistently hit off the Queen if you are able to proc this ability multiple times. I thought about putting in Oswald instead of Chicha, but I'm like, no, Chicha at least guarantees me the draw when I ink twice, and there's a lot of cards here that allow me to ink twice, because if you see Chicha in the late game, she's cheaper than HIRAM. You just drop her, and then you trigger the Greystone Dragon, right? You ink for turn, or you trigger Stone Dragon, Fishbone, ink and uninkable, right? Now you're off to the races getting the draws with the Chicha. Not a bad option, but again, have to test it to see if it's actually going to be viable. What's more interesting potentially is how a Sapphire Steel list will adapt, because it didn't lose just HIRAM, it lost Fortisphere as well. This list, I've opted for 2 Chichas. Not sure if you want to maybe play 4. I just couldn't find the room. I was already at 61. But this list is focused on the Tipo, the Sail, and the Fishbone Quill. And similar to Zan's list, which is where this inspiration came from, can we utilize the Sheriff of Nottingham after Fortisphere and HIRAM ban? Well, we're going to have to test that and see. Again, a list that I haven't directly tested, but something I think that could help Sapphire Steel survive is an item-oriented list like this, where you can essentially play Sheriff and Scrooge for free, or play Sheriff for a very reduced cost, which is insane. And if you expect less Ruby in the meta, which is again what we're seeing at the top tables, a lot of people experimenting with non-Ruby decks now that Ruby Sapphire has kind of fallen off the map in terms of its tier 1 status, there's going to be a lot less to check this card. 9 willpower if we're in a steel-oriented meta or like an emerald-oriented meta. It's a lot harder to deal with a card like this. Like, there's almost nothing that instantly outs this in either color. Like, it's only Bruno's really in emerald that can deal with this right away. And then if they don't discard this off of the Bruno, like, you can just redrop it. The questing power in this deck is absolutely insane between these top-end cards here, the Tamatoas, the Sheriffs, and then you play 23 items, of which 12 are 1-drop items. All of these cards have utilities. All of them can proc on their own. You don't need to trigger any banishing. You, again, utilize the Bell for anti-aggro threats, and you're only playing Strength, no Storms, with 12 uninkables, because not only is Sheriff just a huge questing body, it also has support. So you can beef up the Bell to an 8-3, which is going to run over everything, including opposing libraries on the opponent's end if they're on Amethyst locations. It's absolutely crazy. Boost up your Scrooge to a 9-4, and Scrooge is very easy to play for free as well with the 12 1-drop items. It's a pretty crazy list. This list, just like the other Sapphire list and Ruby Sapphire, is aiming to utilize the Maurice's Workshop as a draw engine. This one is a little bit easier to justify than the Ruby Sapphire one, in my opinion, because you can actually afford to lose tempo to pay the ink in order to proc draws off of your item plays. With Ruby Sapphire, it's a little bit harder to do that because with Ruby Sapphire, you do need your ink to get your interactions off, right? Like your Maui, your Sisu, your removal options. However, because you have the ability with the Sapphire deck to play, I mean, and you can argue you could play Scrooge and Sheriff in the Ruby version, but I just think it fits a little bit better in the Sapphire Steel version. But the reason why you can afford to lose all your tempo and pay all your ink to draw a bunch of cards off of one or more workshops whenever you play these very efficient one-cost items is because you can hopefully play a Scrooge for free after you've went through some of these one-drop items, or play the Sheriff for free or very reduced cost as well. So you don't necessarily need to utilize all your ink every turn to play things like the Tamatoas and whatnot, and the rest of your curve is fairly cheap. So this is a deck I think that could work very, very well. Again, the Chicha engine may not be as necessary in this deck. Again, you do have to rely on seeing the workshop, but the fact that you can ink twice with Fishbone or Greatstone Dragon will continue to proc Chicha as well as a draw engine. So yeah, your anti-aggro is basically just all in the hands of Bell with the Storm. Keep in mind that against the evasive deck, like the Emerald Amethyst evasive, like you virtually have no play into the evasive threats like Genie and the Diablo, which is, you know, a problem. The green Diablo continues to be a bane for a lot of these decks, so you're gonna have to maybe think about ways to deal with that. I mean, strength is one way, but it might be the only way. Is it worth playing something like Imperial Bow? No, probably not. Is it worth playing something that can challenge evases? Probably yes. Where do you fit that in with 61 cards? Maybe you do cut this Chicha engine and put in something like Magic Brooms. I don't know. Until you test that matchup and you really see what it's like, there's not much that you can do except for try to tech against it the best you can. It would have been nice if Last Cannon also gave evasive, but this only gives Challenger 3, which is still very good, right? It turns like your T-Pos and basically everything into bigger bodies, similar to Sheriff giving support, right? The Queen proccing in this deck as well is pretty big. You don't have things to ready it up, but being able to hit like Maurice's Workshop, Stone Dragon, or Fishbone Quill off this Queen is nice. I guess you could argue, since you know you're aiming to play your one-drop efficient items, you could cut this Queen for the anti-evasive threat. I do think you don't want to go lower than 30 characters though, because then you're just running the risk of hard bricking since you don't have Fortisphere anymore as an efficient one-drop item. You know, these cards don't replace themselves and you have no HIRAM any longer. So once these cards are on the field, you're using them for the affinity ability of Sheriff and of Scrooge McDuck basically, and not for potential redraws in the future. That's the big loss we've got with the Sapphire decks, right? Is these items now have to stand on their own in being good and efficient. Yes, you get synergy with Sheriff and Scrooge, but obviously it's not nearly as good without HIRAM literally turning all these into draw twos, right? Which was very powerful. So that's where we're at, or my theory with how we can make item-based Sapphire decks work still. Again, I think if you're going to play Ruby Sapphire, there's almost a case to be made that you shouldn't be playing any list other than the Shark list, because it is proven to be a very efficient list still. But again, until we get more hard testing data, maybe HIRAM really did do a lot for the Shark deck, even though they relied on it a lot less. I think it can survive without the HIRAM. But yeah, that's my take. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Stay tuned for the other deck list if you're interested in the analysis there. Let me know what you think in the comment section below if you made it this far. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.